Nikesh, thank you so much and good afternoon. It's funny you mentioned the title of the book because the paperback version just came out from the UK and I was sort of excited. I had ordered it on Amazon, wanted to do my part to get it up in the rankings. And it arrived and it's just called The Future of the Internet now. So who knows? One of those old media, new media things going on. Speaking of old media, new media, we have some representatives of both, sometimes in the body of the same person. And I thought what we would do is we would bring them all up at once, have a chance to introduce them one by one, get a sense of where they're coming from, and then open it up to a wide discussion. So with no further ado, let me ask our panelists for this afternoon to come on up. How are you? Welcome. Sit anywhere you like. Except for my chair, I'm told. That's apparently my chair, but there you go. I don't know how much use I'll be making of it. All right, so let's get started with Jean-Bernard Lévy. Pleased to meet you, sir. Welcome.
Good afternoon.
Can't help but ask as the first question, the question that Crown Prince Hakan asked in Mongolia, what did you want to be when you grew up?
It's a good question. Huh?
Still
maybe a musician, that's why I'm at Vivendi,
And how did you beat a path to Vivendi? How did
I get into there?
Yes.
It's a complicated story like all of us. I mean, I was at the beginning a telecommunications engineer, and then I got into finance, and then media, and then it's a bit of everything.
Yes. And I guess Vivendi itself has had quite a path. Begins as CGE in 1853.
Yeah,
Talk about a commodity business. I know you have no responsibility for this yet. Providing water to cities and towns in Paris. Did not shed the water business until the late 20th century. And I guess by now, Vivendi, the classic media conglomerate. What's under your umbrella right now?
We have 5 businesses. 2 are large, global, digital media companies. Both of them are based in the US. We are the world leaders in each of these businesses. One is video games.
Yes.
The second one is music.
Yes.
Music production and music publishing. Then we have 3 territorial businesses, 2 in France, the pay TV system, a bit equivalent to BSkyB, it's called Canal Plus in France, and SFR, which is a large telco.
Yes.
And then we have a business in Africa, which is centered around Morocco. So we are in media and communications. But I would say, generally speaking, we are in digital media and entertainment.
Gotcha. And how much of your mind share each day is allocated to which of the 5 businesses?
I would say, my mind share is we are a decentralized group. So I'm really trying to look towards the future, allocate the right resources to bring the future to where it should be. Like, for instance, we had a big dilemma a few years ago, but the video games business, we were a bit subscale. Now we are the largest company in the world. It took a little while to get there. And I say that's my mission is more to try to develop our businesses towards big ambitions. Yes. And of course, we have a very decentralized day-to-day approach to things.
And you took the helm when?
In 2005.
2005.
I was the number 2 for 3 years, 2002 to 2005. Then I was
now,
the
2002,
CEO 4 years ago.
Not the best year in the world.
Not really.
$20-some billion loss. Sorry, euro.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry. It would be better if it were dollars, I guess.
At the time, it was about the same.
About the same.
Yeah. Sorry for you guys.
Fair enough. All right, so paint the scene for us in 2002.
It's a conglomerate. It's made of hundreds of businesses that nobody really controls. It has close to 40 billion euros or dollars of debt. And all of a sudden, there is a liquidity problem, I would say. We don't like the word crisis because, legally speaking, it means a lot. So there was no crisis. There was just a problem.
No crisis, just problems.
Just problems.
Got it. And
so we had to turn the business around, which means we had to really refocus and streamline. So we sold hundreds of companies all around the world, very anecdotal to very large businesses. And we really kept to things we thought would grow and that we knew we could manage well.
Yes. And how did you achieve that vision? Is this the kind of thing where it's good to have just a small team that sits in the boardroom, occasionally goes on retreat to figure things out, or is it more a whistle-stop tour of all the different pieces of the octopus?
It's a bit of both. I would say within 3 months we decided to really remain in the communications and the media areas. At the same time, you have to look at opportunities. So we tried to sell some businesses, which finally we kept. There were some businesses that we sold, maybe we should not have sold. I wouldn't say anything significant there. But at the end of the day, yes, we really refocused and grew. And with one ambition, which is to be a manageable company with big leaders in every area. So where we are number 3, number 4, number 5, we dropped all this.
Got it.
We
so let's stick for a moment with the 2 areas you mentioned as sort of the real media areas. One is gaming, Activision Blizzard, 25 billion euro merger recently completed, is that right?
That's right, last year in July.
And now the biggest property there is World of Warcraft.
Which I'm sure I'm going to get blamed for tons of people around here.
How many World of Warcraft players?
No, none of them.
Nobody wants to admit it.
How many parents of World of Warcraft players? Many of them.
Any World of Warcraft widows or widowers? No. And do you play World of Warcraft?
No, but my son plays, of course. One of my sons, yes, he's a big player. So I have a sort of, indirect addiction.
Got it. And do you see synergies between that prime property and some of the other areas in which Vivendi is seeking mastery or
yes, very much so, because World of Warcraft you can describe as a video game, but you can also describe as a big community, which is based on the internet. You can only play it through a high-speed internet connection. And in fact, we have 12 million people playing roughly at least one night out of 3, one evening out of 3. So 4 million people every night. And it's probably the largest pay community on the internet today in the world. So we see it as a community, and we try to understand how it means that we get stickiness from this community, and also that we can monetize the content. One of the biggest concerns in the digital media is that the very successful digital media have audience. They don't know how to monetize it for many of them. And we have managed to monetize.
And World of Warcraft is among the most traditional of monetization models, right? You sign them up, they pay money, they get addicted, they keep paying money. Sounds great for a newspaper, too, if it could make it work.
Yeah, you get say, 12, 13 euros or dollars subscription per month. And, you try to bring new content all the time, like a newspaper, like a magazine, like any kind of programming, so that you keep interest all the time. So we release what we call patches about every 6 to 8 weeks, and we release big expansion packs about every 18 months, so that we keep a high-level interest for all our gamers all around the world.
And how about reaching all of the people who aren't yet addicted? Is the idea to get them into World of Warcraft the traditional way, or somehow smaller islands of Warcraft, something less, immersive?
No, we try to get to everybody with demographics.
Okay. Now tell us just a little bit about UMG and the music side of things, and including the monetization models and how those may have changed, or are you having a problem there, or a crisis, or everything's great?
I would say we are in the middle of an incredible transition. And of course, it's difficult to really foresee how it will end up. At this time, we are doing very well in terms of our financial performance. It's a business that's been going under a crisis for now something like 8 or 9 years because of piracy.
Yes.
So we've lost about 40% of sales of CDs globally from 2001 to now. We are still keeping good margins, but at the same time, we are trying as quickly as possible to accelerate transition from a pretty simple model, which is the CD you go to a store to buy, to a model which is a diversified model with lots of revenues. And we are trying to build and to get into new areas all the time with new business models. One of them is already working very well, which is downloads of tracks or albums into things like an iPod or a cell phone.
Yes.
And we have a significant percentage of our sales now, which is about 25% globally, 40% in the US, made of downloads. Many of our artists now make more money, and we make more money, selling downloads in the digital world than selling CDs in the physical world.
Yes.
And then we are testing all sorts of new ideas, including one with Google, we announced about 6 weeks ago, which is probably, hopefully going to be a dramatic change in the way that all of us, we consider the music videos.
Yes.
20 years ago, 30 years ago, music videos were invented as a promotion tool to help sell CDs. And so we even gave them away to MTV, which made tons of money with our promotion product, which gave them for free, which was really, a crazy idea, stupid idea. Now we consider the music videos as an artistic product by itself. We want to monetize. And the venture we recently announced with Google, and hopefully we will also attract some fellow competitors in the music area to join that company, which is called Vevo, V-E-V-O. And this venture is going to sell the videos, the professionally made videos outside of YouTube, where on YouTube you find a mixture of very good quality videos and also, anybody singing in the, under the shower, and that's not of great interest for artistic reasons.
You subscribe to that channel too.
Yeah, that's right. And sure. How do you know that?
Yeah, that's very good.
And we are going to monetize, we hope, the CPM, the cost per 1,000 viewers will be much higher because it's professional quality videos on that channel when compared to what YouTube can sell for.
So right now, a sort of bricolage theory of we'll try lots of different things, maybe even accumulate money from different sources. Different indeed, I guess, from World of Warcraft. It's not like World of Songcraft, where you could pay a monthly fee and then you're in the world of Songcraft, listen, play, whatever you like.
But we have a great area for synergies between music and video games, which is the Guitar Hero family.
Yes.
The Guitar Hero, Band Hero, DJ Hero family of video games, which is made through music, but everybody plays like if you were a guitar player or a singer or a drummer and so on.
Yes.
This is becoming a pretty big business. There is a lot of competition, singing, dancing, playing the guitar, but it's video games based on music and dancing has already become quite a significant business, and we are the leaders there with Guitar Hero.
This is almost like the actual definition of media conglomerate is if you've been parodied at least in 3 different ways by the American television show South Park. And I think you actually have in World of Warcraft and as the music industry and as Guitar Hero.
That's right.
Yes,
that's
amazing.
Right. You're right. Yeah.
Amazing.
So you don't know whether it's music, whether it's games, and so on. At the end of the day, it's we've sold more than 30 million units of Guitar Hero packages. All kinds of packages. Some of them are dedicated to specific acts. Some of them are more, the guitar and all that stuff.
And at the moment right now, you're back to profitability.
Oh, yeah, sure. You mean at Vivendi?
Yes.
Yeah, I think this
That's called a softball question.
No, we came back to profit in 2004, first dividend. We skipped the dividend in 2003.
Yes.
Then we returned to a dividend in 2004. So that's 4, 5, 6. It's 6th year we grew the dividend now. We've been growing the dividend for the last 6 years.
Terrific.
And we are growing the dividend this year, although it's a pretty tough year for everybody, but not so much for us.
Very good. A little envy in the room right now, but it's very good. So, okay, over to Mark Thompson from BBC. Mark, what did you want to be when you grew up?
It's a terrible thing to say, but a journalist is what I wanted to be. And didn't think, by the way, I want to be a TV journalist or I want to be a print journalist. I wanted to be a journalist. And unfortunately, it came to pass. I did become one.
How long have you been at BBC?
Most recently as chief executive, editor-in-chief. I've been there 5 years. But before that, I was at Channel 4, but I spent the first 20-odd years of my career at the BBC as well. So most of my career at the BBC.
Yes. Now, the BBC is sort of a unique creature. What would you say makes BBC different from the standard media property, if we can call it that?
Well, there's a couple of big differences. It was created as a not-for-profit public corporation in 1927. Began as a JV of wireless companies who wanted something to broadcast so they could sell radio receivers, but very quickly became a public corporation with a royal charter and has stayed that way. That's the first difference. I think the second thing is at the BBC, we started TV transmissions in 1936. So you've got a company or an enterprise which is thinking about different media, how you relate different media before the Second World War. And I think it's fair to say about the BBC, which has, any number of issues and criticisms around it, is that it's over the years proven surprisingly able to reinvent itself and adapt and to seize the opportunities of new media. Today we reach, as recent figures I've seen, we reach every week something like 98% of UK adults with our services. That's web, mobile, radio and television services in the UK. and we probably also reach around 400 million people every week around the world. So, and in many ways, are some of our newest services.
Yes.
Our website, for example, are some of our most popular services. So in a way, the other surprising thing in a way about the BBC is the BBC, an organisation which you would have thought would have every reason to be rather hidebound and traditional, has certainly to date been reasonably good at thinking hard about the future and reacting to it.
And I guess part of that expectation might come from a business model where you're pretty secure in income. Is that right?
Well, well, put it this way: the issues we face are different from the issues everyone else faces. I often talk to a guy called Michael Grade, who's the executive chairman currently, not for long, of ITV, and Michael always says he's got the hardest, that I've got the hardest job in broadcasting, and I kind of always ask him how he's getting on with his. But the difference between, e.g., Michael Grade, maybe Carolyn and me, is that the things which are relatively easy for a commercial broadcaster are fantastically hard. The whole political dimension, the political debate about the future of media, I spend, maybe half my time on probably. On the other hand, manifestly, because we have a license fee which delivers £3.5 billion of money from the British public into content.
People pay for their television sets each year. Just
so, that stacks up to something like £3.5 billion. So. Getting on for $5 billion. And that's always been a pretty good way of concentrating investment in content. But it turns out that, particularly in the age of the web, that's an amazingly effective way of making sure that you can concentrate money on high-quality content at a time when other models are proving more troublesome.
Yes. Now, we're aware of Google Internet evangelist Vint Cerf's dictum that power corrupts and PowerPoint corrupts absolutely. But I'm given to understand you have just a couple slides you might want to share with us.
I won't detain you very long, but I thought one thing which is very much on our minds is about the convergence of, some of our bits of old media, in particular TV watching. Yes. And the web and how that plays out. And I just thought I'd show you just a few snapshots of one service. This is the iPlayer service. This is a 7-day catch-up service we launched on Christmas Day 2007 in the UK only. This is geo IP locked to the UK. iPlayer is interesting and differs slightly from products like Hulu. It's roughly...
You may have missed the original broadcast. You may not have your own VCR or DVR.
You can any point over the next 7 days, you can go on the web and watch the program with a very simple player. It plays in the browser. Click, click, and you're there. A couple of things about iPlayer, first of all, is we decided from day one we were going to deploy it on multiple platforms. So although it's available on the web, it's been the cable company in the UK, Virgin, have fully deployed it with the same look and feel as on the web. There are multiple mobile devices where you can get it. We're supporting, I think, currently 16 different versions of iPlayer.
And are there any rights management wrappers around it or not?
Yes, absolutely. There's a DRM on. There's download with DRM. There's also a, in the jargon, secure streaming inside the player. So there's 99.5% control on security. Here you can see the orange shows you the growth of the service on the PC, Mac and Linux in the UK, and above that, when in June 2008 Virgin started using it, you can also see the extent to which. And this is now very big. This is getting on for 600 million programs delivered in less than 18 months. If you show the next slide, the point here I wanted to make it. What's interesting about the demographic here is this shape of demographic, very evenly balanced, is very like a TV demographic. Slightly undercooked. The 55 pluses, people over the age of 55, slightly lower represented than they would be with a TV audience. But this is much, much closer to the broad television use of media you'd see, rather than, as it were, anything which looks even faintly like web early adopters. And that's partly because the content, of course, is TV.
Right.
But what's interesting is the alacrity, the speed, and the effectiveness which the public have found and started to regularly use this new way of consuming the media they want.
And if a new person tunes into this, do you make any additional money?
We don't.
None.
We don't. In the UK, the assumption is, by the way, after 7 days, the content comes down and can't be accessed, and is subsequently monetized in all sorts of other ways through the ways we've always commercially exploited our content. And I'll come on and talk about monetization in a moment. This is a kind of, if you like, this is almost like a broadening of that initial broadcast window to a week.
Yes.
But it's not because we think this content hasn't got commercial value, and it's not because we don't think monetization is important, both for ourselves and also for others.
Yes.
I think one of the things that's important the BBC does is, it's very powerful, particularly in the UK, that what we don't do is foreclose opportunities for monetization for others.
Yes. And do you have big bandwidth costs to support these millions of downloads?
What's interesting is that, I mean, our assumption and the initial technologies we were looking at were peer-to-peer technologies because we worried about but the truth of the matter is that the way in which the costs of serving this have just tumbled down in recent years means that actually distribution costs there's a big debate.
Right.
Net neutrality, the ISPs and so forth, but so far distribution costs have not been...
and you don't even have to lean that on peer-to-peer in order to...
Nope, and that's turned out to be less important than we thought it would. Just go on to just two more. The next one, if we can look at that, the next chart, just makes the point that like for like, users in homes where they can just get it on their main TV via the cable, compared like to like with PC users, much more heavy use. And indeed, in Virgin households, this is a very significant part of the...
Because it's right on the same TV and the same apparatus they use to look at
a couple of
TV.
points to make here. Firstly, the interesting thing is what Virgin have seen, I believe, is they've actually seen an increase in the uptake of paid-for VOD, which they believe is itself driven by iPlayer. It's one of the points sometimes made is, well, the trouble with iPlayer is you give all this high-quality content away on the web for nothing. People won't want to pay for it. It looks like that what we're seeing so far in Virgin homes is that paid-for VOD is showing a spike because people who haven't tried VOD are beginning to get into the idea of using VOD.
Because this is a form of free VOD from the point of view of the
Well,
Virgin
I think
subscriber.
it's because there's still a very large number of people out there who aren't really thinking about VOD as a consumer choice.
Right.
And because iPlayer's had a lot of attention on the BBC and because it's become very popular, it's beginning to introduce people to the whole idea of not just free VOD, but also paid for VOD. But the other thing to say is what this tells us, at least what it tells me, is that one of the most interesting areas for development in the next few years is the whole debate about how you get IPTV onto the main set in the house. And if you just go to the last slide, it just shows some of the things that we're doing. First of all, BBC iPlayer, this brand iPlayer, we've offered to share the brand with the other public service broadcasters and potentially with others, so that rather than iPlayer remaining a proprietary BBC brand, it becomes a simple, convenient. We wouldn't monetize this, we would just allow others to use it. So a more broadly used label and kind of brand and look and feel for in particular, high-quality British original content. We're looking hard at a standard, we call it Canvas, which would enable FreeSat and Freeview are both set-top boxes. They're free open standard set-top boxes. Freeview, digital terrestrial television, FreeSat, as the name suggests, satellite television. A new standard for a brand, a standard, a simple-to-use EPG, and a chip, which means you can plug the box into your broadband connection and get services like the iPlayer, but also, crucially, other IPTV on-demand services, YouTube, Flickr, Last.fm, potentially public services like the NHS.
And each of these would represent some form of business arrangement or deal among the players.
The assumption in all these cases is that we're talking here about an open source, open standard environment, which will enable multiple models of monetization, dynamic advertising, pay-per-view, monthly subscription, depending on who wants to do what. But crucially, trying to ensure that the pathway, which looks like from our own stats as if it's going to be significant, which sees the PC and the TV getting closer together, that pathway is as open as it can be.
Got it. You had mentioned geolocating. It means that if I'm not in the UK,
you can't get. Last time I tried to get the iPlayer abroad, I was in Las Vegas airport, and I tried to do it, and it told me I couldn't get the iPlayer in Welsh.
And you felt proud.
I felt the system was working. Now, I spent my whole time trying to crack our own system to see whether... so the GIP keeps these rights in the UK, and means that people elsewhere can't get the content. And by the way, we've been using GeoIP for some years now. For example, we have very extensive rights to the Olympic Games in the UK. We don't have those rights abroad. And actually, we've got now years of experience and a lot of confidence in our ability to segregate rights by markets.
And do you aspire to unlock one market at a time, or multiple external markets?
Well, I think the key thing to say about the BBC is, in common with all other British media, we have a very different footprint internationally than we do in the UK, and our footprint varies very much by territory. I mean, some encouraging things. There's an environment which is the US iTunes environment, which is actually a very open environment in a sense. You know, you put your content up there, and US consumers can decide to use it or not. Without any kind of marketing or support, we represent, the BBC represents about 2% of all sales in US iTunes. So, I mean, our view is that the global market for not just BBC, but for UK content is actually very strong. It's not just for us. I mean, The Guardian, The Economist, The FT, there's a lot of success stories, UK TV entertainment format rights. And the trick is, in a way, to find the right way, region by region around the world, and the right sets of business models to unlock that value.
Now, this may anticipate our discussion to come, but so far in this projection of the near-term future, as you're looking at it, it does not sound like a seismic shift in configuration between broadcaster and listener. These are different pathways to get BBC content out to people, but not necessarily a different relationship of how people might...
No, but we think that's happening as well. And I mean, I'll give you an example of, I mean, in the news interface between public and BBC News, it's been transformed. And I'll give you an example of the dilemma. There was a day, I mean, if you don't come from this country, please don't laugh. There was a day, beginning of February, where it snowed a lot. Unusual, and it was one of the biggest stories.
It means more than a couple
of
centimeters.
The year. Exactly. Siberian conditions of a centimetre.
All molecular motion ceases.
We received that day 30,000 pieces of news gathering material from the public, stills, videos, texts, and so forth. We used about 300. We put about 300 of the 30,000 up, but we can see it's incredibly frustrating. If you do decide you want to send something to us and it doesn't get used at all. So we're having a conversation with Flickr about an arrangement whereby we can make sure that every single piece that comes up potentially gets up somewhere, though BBC News continues to... but no, I mean, the really big change in the last 2 or 3 years has been the way in which, for us, in particular in news, not just news, sport as well, I'd pick out, it's become a conversation. That we can't do anything without an unbelievably lively level of debate on the web. News gathering, as I've said, increasingly the public want to push in news to us as well, and I think that's another very big dimension of change. I think it's doesn't mean what it doesn't mean. I think it's a mistake to think that you kind of flip from one world to another, and the world of authoritative one-way broadcasting gets completely finished, and it's the buggy, and what replaces it, the car, is do-it-yourself interactive news. I think we'll see these things coexist. But there's no question that the public themselves have got the means of production in terms of creating comment and news, and they're clearly using it in their millions.
Got it. Thank you so much. So let's turn to Carolyn. Carolyn McCall, CEO of the Guardian Media Group, which includes such properties as the Guardian newspaper and Auto Trader, site for the trading of autos. Carolyn, what did you want to be when you grew up?
Well, I wanted to be working, actually. I just thought there weren't that many women I knew as I was growing up working, and I just wanted to work. And I thought of being a teacher, and I actually was a teacher for a while, and I also thought of being a journalist. And I was offered a job as a journalist, and I realized I'd be much better working with journalists than as a journalist, and so that's what I do. So, yeah.
And Guardian Media Group, also a sort of distinct, characterized media property. Tell us a little bit about that.
That makes it most... I don't think my mic's working, but can everybody...
The handheld certainly
is.
It's
okay. The Guardian Media Group is distinctive because it's owned by a trust. Now, that doesn't mean it's a .org or it's not commercial. It's not like the BBC at all in that respect, but it means that it has a public purpose. The mission of The Guardian is about independent journalism. They can write what they want. whenever they want. They don't have any shareholders. They don't have a proprietor. There is a trust. And so that gives it a real uniqueness and a real strength, I think, particularly in turbulent times. And it's allowed, I think, us to take, on The Guardian in particular, a very long-term view. Now, in order to sustain that journalism, which I know is going to be the subject of much debate and is obviously a very critical thing in society, our view is that we need a very diversified media group to do that. And so we only have other businesses in order to make a profit so that we can sustain that financial and editorial independence of The Guardian. So I think it is very distinctive when you compare us to other media groups.
Which might mean that the media piece of it, The Guardian as a paper or a corresponding web property, doesn't have to necessarily make money, given that it might have other pieces of the portfolio to sustain it.
It has to be profit-seeking. It has to be cost-efficient.
Yes.
But it is not there to make a profit. It is not its reason for being.
Yes.
And therefore, we will take a very filtered view of that in a way that if we were a listed company, we just couldn't do.
And right now, are you hiring flat or redundancies?
On The Guardian, in particular? Actually, at the moment, we've got a recruitment freeze, and so the much emphasized 50 journalists is actually non-replacement. So it doesn't mean we won't make redundancies. It doesn't mean we won't be looking for voluntary redundancies. And one of the key themes, I think, is that we are in the middle of a very deep transition.
Got it.
And we have been for some time. I think, a lot of people are talking about the recession and the impact on media businesses of the recession. Of course, it's severe, particularly if you're a consumer-facing business. But actually, I think we've been dealing with the structural change for many years. And what the recession has done is just completely exacerbated what we've experienced.
Got it. Now, I understand you have a video you'd like to share with us.
No, you want to share this video with us.
There's a video that I want to share with us that I have not yet seen, but I understand is exquisite.
Well, apparently.
Shall we roll the tape?
The American people have spoken, and they have spoken clearly.
Welcome to Politics Weekly. I am Allegra Stratton.
Okay, no time to pause, no time to catch breath, because it's time for our main guest this week.
Football is very important because it really brings unity.
Mugabe has been accused of rigging elections for 18 years. Now finally, here's the evidence.
That's why I said you wanted to use it. When we were talking, I just thought it's very difficult to describe the change.
Yes.
And I hate the polarization of old and new media.
Yes.
Because as you said, I think if you've been doing this for 15 years on the web, then actually to be called old media is incredibly insulting.
Which is to say, you were among the first, you think, to really grasp the opportunities that the web showed.
Whether we were the first or not, I think the fact is we were one of the first, but we've always tried to be we've always tried to embrace everything that's gone on the web, and we've tried to be part of it, rather than something where you stick your newspaper on the web or you stick your content on the web and see what happens to it.
Yes.
So I think we've had a very different attitude to development. We've never thought, even in '94, when we launched our first site, most of our peers were worrying about cannibalization. We were thinking, how can we be the best in print? How can we be the best on the web? It wasn't about what this robbing Peter to pay Paul. It was just, we just kind of went, we're going to be really good at this, and then we'll see where we end up. And we did go for reach before revenue, and it's been pretty important to us to now find ways of making money on the web.
And of course, with Mark, we talked a little bit about national UK versus global and geolocating and such like that. Do you have a sense of how much your audience is or you desire to be global versus UK?
Yeah, I think, when we put up the world's leading liberal voice, it's a very pompous claim, isn't it, really? And actually, it's an aspiration. It's actually saying to everybody in our own organization that this is possible. And without the web, it would have been a complete nonsense.
Yes.
But we realized, without even trying, that The Guardian online has a huge audience in the States, so 8 million users in the States, more than the LA Times and the Houston Chronicle. Yes. Now, that's amazing. We haven't marketed that. We haven't done anything on that.
Yes.
So there was, this thing about our content, our journalism, was being wanted.
Yes.
People were just finding it. And I think that is a fantastic opportunity.
Yes.
That is all about opportunity.
And are you starting to worry about monetization now, or is it still about
We've
reach?
always been worried about monetization, don't get us wrong. I think what's changed, we have our own sales team in States. We used Reuters for a while, then we flipped to doing our own thing. We bought paid content. We've merged that with Guardian America. We've got the publisher of Post.com, who's now working for us full-time. So we're taking revenue very seriously. It's just that actually 3 years ago, or even 2 years ago, you'd have said display online was quite a robust model. Well, actually, it's not anymore. There's an oversupply of inventory. Ad networks have come and just killed the yield, so it's become a commodity. And it's made the display proposition online extremely flawed. So the classified model, actually the jobs or the cars, property, is a very strong model online with great margins. So, and we're lucky to be in 2 out of 3 of those sectors. So we have Guardian Jobs, we have Autotrader. Autotrader this year will make £100 million worth of profit out of digital.
So are you extending baleful glances with Craigslist?
We've met with Craigslist, and we understand they have no real plans to do very much in the UK. But if they come, it will be like competing with Gumtree or eBay or Google Local or Yahoo Local or whoever it is.
Except they don't appear to need an income stream, which means they don't appear to charge for
makes
anything.
it more dangerous. Yeah, makes it much more dangerous. But we're used to competing with free competition. We have the BBC. So whenever we're asked about charging models, the old model was very simple. We had cover price, we had display, we had classified. We now have to look at every opportunity we can to make money, because actually charging for our general news content with the BBC, with high quality content out there, is impossible.
One of the great advantages of the BBC is that we train organisations like The Guardian. If they can survive with us in the market, they can beat any market in the world.
That's one way of looking at it.
It's very disciplining to have the 800-pound gorilla lurking at all times. So, so just fast forward your favorite interval beyond now or soon. Call it, 10 years? You tell me what a good interval is. What is your ideal configuration for what you see as The Guardian? What would it be like if I'm a consumer of media content out there and I'm about to experience The Guardian? What do you figure I'll experience in, say, 10 years?
I think, as you saw from the video, our whole philosophy has been that The Guardian should be available anywhere. So whether it's through podcast, the voice of The Guardian, the kind of tone and the journalism, the independence of that journalism should be available. And there might be some people in 10 years' time that still want to get it in print, and we'll have to find a very efficient way of delivering that print, because I think in 10 years, the levels of newspapers might be quite considerably lower than today. I still think there will be a print audience, but it will be, more of doing, the iPlayer, for instance. We're talking to the BBC about embedding that on our site. We'll be doing a lot more video. We'll be doing a lot more audio. And we're actually currently the second largest speech broadcaster in the country after the BBC, and that's over 18 months.
Got it.
So 10 years is a long time.
Right.
You can see that long. But I think what I know is that The Guardian will be alive and vibrant and will be part of whatever's going on in 10 years.
And the stuff I might see through this new variety of media might come at me in all sorts of different formats and delivery mechanisms. In your view, will it still be pretty much news and commentary from, as you say, a liberal perspective, a liberal voice?
Well, we do a lot more than news and comment.
Yes.
We do a huge amount in the arts, we do a huge amount in science and the environment. I think we'll be a leading environment site, actually, in 10 years' time, probably much less than that.
Yes.
But I think that we will always do news and comment because there is going to be a desperate need for independent news.
Yes.
I think there is, we embrace, as you know, user-generated content, blogging. We were the first to do that in this country. But I do think there is a place for independent, accurate news. Putting a reporter in Iraq, for instance, or Afghanistan costs us about £180,000 a year, but we will continue to do that because you want to have independent reporting from those countries, so you know you can make up your mind then about what's really going on.
Does that also mean, at least two of you say, when kids you wanted to be journalists when you grew up? If a kid at one of the schools that you're going to visit after the next Zeitgeist comes up to you and says, Ms. McCall, I aspire to be a journalist, what is your answer back?
I'd say great.
Great.
It's a fantastic
It's
thing
a
to be.
great job.
No, well, I think, I do think media organizations and journalists are in, journalists are in
big
huge
future
demand,
in it.
but they have to be completely embracing of the new. So journalism is about today and what's happening in the future. It's not about necessarily what we've always done in the past.
So
although
what's the...
some things are. So good, solid, investigative journalism. So the Ian Tomlinson thing, which I think a lot of you will have heard about, the G20 summit, the guy who died, that was a piece of film by an American guy who sent it to The Guardian. They sent it to The Guardian, not a broadcaster, because they believed The Guardian would show it in full and would report it and investigate it, which is what they did. Good old-fashioned journalism. Right?
Terrific. Thank you. On to Pedro Ramirez, editor of El Mundo, founder of El Mundo. I understand made editor of Diario 16 at the age of 28, one of the youngest editors ever. And tell us a little bit about, did you always want to be a journalist? How did you get into this business?
I should answer, of course, I had always wanted to be a journalist, but maybe I should say also I had always wanted to be an editor. Because I don't know if I am the only human being in a developed country which had been for more of half of his life editor-in-chief of a national newspaper. Of course, in Spain I am 57, this had just happened. I am 57 and I had been an editor for 29 years.
Wow.
My goodness.
Well, that applause had a kind of let's give him a gold watch character to it. But we don't want to give you a gold watch. We know you're also looking towards the future.
We launched El Mundo 20 years ago, the very same year that the internet was born, the World Wide Web. And we celebrated our common birthday 3 weeks ago in Madrid with Berners-Lee and Cerf. And we were discussing some of the same topics we are talking about today. And I told them the last thing we could imagine when we, a group of young editors, were launching 20 years ago a new national paper was that very 1,000 kilometers from Spain, people like you were inventing a new media which was going to allow us to claim not only 1.5 million readers for our printed edition, but 21 million unique users, as we had in March in the internet. We are the leading newspaper, electronic newspaper in Spanish language in the world. So I told them, thank you very much in the name of the whole world, and thank you in the name of El Mundo. But by the way, can you give us some hint, can you give us some idea what to do with these 21 million unique users to make a little more happy our shareholders?
There might be someone available for a bilateral or two after the...
They didn't give us any definite answer. I want to anticipate now 2 ideas for further discussion, because we really need to have a viable economic model. We need to make profit in the internet, and we have 2 ideas very clear. First of all, that we are going to charge for some of our contents. We don't know where are going to be the frontier between breaking general news and premium content, but we will have to charge for some of our contents. And secondly, that we definitely need to protect our contents to avoid that anyone else would make profit. with our contents. And for these two reasons, I want to say here today that I am in strong disagreement with some of the statements that some Google executives and some new media gurus had made recently. And my strong conviction that it's impossible to separate the future of journalism from the future of newspapers. That without profitable newspapers operating on a multi-platform basis, there will not be high-quality journalism, and that would be a very serious loss for democracy.
So the gauntlet is thrown down. Let me ask Richard's question at the end of Crown Prince Hakan's presentation. What exactly are you hoping to have happen? What is your ideal?
Well, I'm going to tell you what I really wouldn't like to see happening. And I'm going to use the words. I'm going to say that I'm strongly against what Google's vice president, Marissa Mayer, said 12 days ago in the Washington hearings in front of the Kerry subcommittee in the American Senate. She said that the structure of the web has caused the atomic unit of consumption for news to migrate from the full newspaper to the individual article. If she is right, our future for El Mundo and for our whole group, El Mundo is the center of a multimedia or multi-platform group, which includes also the leading sports paper in Spain, Marca, the leading business paper in Spain, Expansión. These were part of the Recoletos group, which was formerly owned by Pearson, and we bought it after a transitional management buyout. As a whole group, we have 35 million unique users in the internet, and we are developing in a way very similar of what The Guardian is doing, thinking that we should project our brand through all the different media. But if Ms. Mayer is right, and the atomic unit of consumption of news is not going to be anymore the newspaper, and you can make a parallel. Of course, if you want to hear a song, you don't need to buy the whole CD. But if this is going to happen in the newspaper, if the same is going to happen for news, our future would be very gloomy. But I think she is wrong, and I think we have a bright horizon, because no matter what platform they'll use to get the news, the readers concerned with quality journalism, as The Guardian, as the New York Times, as the Times, as the Daily Telegraph, as El Mundo, will always trust professional organizations like ours. And my guess is that if the law does protect intellectual property online, the need to achieve a fair deal with us will come more and more from the side of the so-called aggregators.
Got it. Now, I hear in this some echoes, almost in our first conversation with Ean-Bernard, who has these two properties that are so different from one another in their business model, World of Warcraft and gaming on the one hand, and the music rights ownership on the other. And it almost sounds as if you're looking for the World of Warcraft model, Mundo of Worldcraft. You want the people to immerse in a subscription, and they buy the newspaper, not just they get a little bit of this, a little bit of that, which is more the music model. I'm getting a song here and a song there and a video in a third place. Or am I oversimplifying?
But that has to do with the business model. But I am talking about something.
You're talking about the integrity of the act?
No, I am saying that without professional journalism, without organizations like the newspapers, I am not defending the old system of printed media. I am talking about the same kind of activity as the CEO of The Guardian has described. But without professional journalism organized around companies like ours, it would be impossible to cover the international arena, to have offices in Baghdad and foreign correspondents in the whole planet, and you will not have investigative journalism. And I am not talking just about business.
Yes.
And let me say one very concrete...
Whenever the glasses go on, I know there's going to be another paragraph. Yeah.
This has to do with...
It's called a tell. Yes.
This has to do with fundamental freedoms. Because I want to argue here that while Google and all the other search engines and aggregators are marvelous tools to the cause of knowledge and globalization, their presence would not have changed a single iota in Jefferson's stand on the dilemma of choosing between government without newspapers or newspapers without government.
Now, I know we want to introduce Charlie, but I can tell Carolyn is very eager to get in and say something.
I just think, there is this point about investing in content, which is what we've all talked about.
Yes.
And that there has to be a fair exchange of value. And I think we all will work very well with aggregators. And it's important that we get a very constructive relationship, but it's important that people recognize what is happening in terms of content, because there are some organizations like the BBC and The Guardian that will continue to invest regardless, but there will be many, many others that will go down because they cannot afford to invest in good, strong, independent content that will encourage active citizenship worldwide. And if we want society to be responsible, listen to everything else that's gone on at this conference, then you will need an informed electorate. And that, I think, is what Pedro is talking about too.
Yes.
So I think this is about a fair exchange of value for your content.
Yes.
How that is going to be resolved, I don't have the answer to, but I think we do have to sit around the table and talk about that.
Well, we are sitting around the table.
Well, not this table, another table with people from Google and others.
We are sitting around a table right now. My guess is everybody is paying very close attention right now. Suddenly, wow, everybody's listening. What better time I can think of, I can't think of one, to introduce Charlie Leadbeater. He's somebody who has worn many different hats. Longtime contributor to Marxism Today.
There you go.
Now Marxism Yesterday, I understand.
Marxism no more. Marxism coming back.
You heard it here
Even
first.
in Washington, yeah.
Another form of sort of quiet rage against the machine. And Tokyo bureau chief at the FT for a while, devised Bridget Jones's Diary. At the time, it was a column. And now an observer, a trend maker, coiner of the phrase pro-am, as in professional amateur and the mix between the two.
I don't think I did coin pro-am. I think that was coined in golf first, and then I borrowed it from golf. Yeah.
Wonderful. So participation, not consumption, not just production. So you've heard these introductions. You've heard a bit of where people stand. Tell us what you think. Are they missing something? Are they basically onto the problem?
Well, I think it makes it very clear. I think there's no media business that I know, other than maybe Glastonbury and maybe Google, that can be absolutely sure of what their business model in 5 years' time will be. I mean, that's what this makes absolutely clear. The second is there is a staggering amount of experimentation going on. By all these people. The third sort of missing ingredient in all of this is shareholders, owners, and money. I remember listening to Ean-Bernard's predecessor, I think, Mr. Messier, give an amazing account of the integrated approach of Vivendi, of content plus infrastructure and all the rest of it. Seemed that big mistake, really, failure, missed opportunity has been forgiven. The BBC is able to do this because of a unique funding arrangement which will go on for a while but really won't last very long, I suspect. And The Guardian is in its, I mean, the BBC license fee is a tax on televisions. It's just, it won't survive. I mean, it just can't. I can't see that it will. And
Are you agreeing with that?
I think there's two. I think there's, what's interesting is there's two different points. One of which is the TV license is absolutely currently based on whether in a household you've got a television receiver. Now, it may well be that come 2016 or 2017, when the next time the charter comes up, the fiscal terms have to be amended. That's possible. Oddly enough, I would say that most of the debates which are happening about content in the UK and about the future of content, the future of regional news, the future of Channel 4, oddly enough, are predicated on the idea that actually, because it is a guaranteed core of pool funding for high-quality content...
There's going to be a public fisc ready to pay for it one way or another.
One way or another. And if you're saying, will the structure need to be developed and evolved, well, frankly, everything else is, so it wouldn't surprise me. But the fundamental question is there any evidence that either today the British public are less willing to pay than they were 5 or 10 years ago, or that they're likely to be 5 or 10 years from now? And all I would say is the data we look at suggests that the consensus around the idea that there's still a logic in pooled investment in high-quality content is pretty good and may actually grow slightly, Charlie, because of the struggles that other models are having.
It might do. I mean, I think there are two sort of big sort of questions or stories beneath this. The first is that basically, when I started in media, I started on the Financial Times. I used to leave the Financial Times every night with the print press running beneath the editorial floor. And most media businesses then were like boulders. They were big, internally focused. They were like boulders, and getting a new boulder onto the beach required an enormous amount of money. And so the creation of Mundo or The Independent in the UK or Channel 4, this is a big, big story. News International moves its boulder from one bit of London to another bit. There's a national dispute about it. If you look at that landscape now, basically what's happening is that hundreds of thousands of people every hour are coming and dropping pebbles on the beach. And this rising tide of pebbles, YouTube videos, Facebook updates, Wikipedia entries, Google, World of Warcraft actors, what have you, is kind of threatening to engulf the boulders. And all future media businesses will be pebble businesses. They will search pebbles, create pebbles, link pebbles, aggregate pebbles. They'll be pebble businesses. Even Carolyn's business model, based on classified, is essentially pebble advertising. So you'll have three kinds of media businesses in future. One is the remaining boulders, fewer but bigger. Another is the pebble businesses of the future, lots of them, but not making a hell of a lot of money, so you better have low costs. And the other is people who used to be boulders trying to be pebbles, or people who've got lots of pebbles together, like Wikipedia, maybe looking like boulders.
This is not like a long this is like a long necklace, a long tail made of a string of varying sized rocks.
And so what's interesting about this world is that Vivendi, World of Warcraft, is really this huge community of players who are sponsored on this platform, and they get together and they create a lot of content together. What's interesting about what we've heard is that all these businesses are getting into technology to distribute content. They're all quite at home with that. The reason that Mark's demographic on iPlayer looks like TV is it's TV.
It is TV.
And so this whole debate about new media, old media is really rather pointless. These are just devices to get stuff to people. What really matters is what people want to do with them. So the second question is, how far are these businesses really exploiting the interactive, communicative, kind of social aspects of this media? World of Warcraft definitely is. Mark says the BBC is increasing a conversation. Some areas it is. I think it's missing huge opportunities, really, to leverage its content and create communities around it. Compared with World of Warcraft or Wikipedia or open source software, the BBC is nowhere near that, it seems to me. It's primarily interested in the iPlayer getting stuff to you. Guardian, I think, is doing better. I think The Guardian is one of the most interesting experiments in this area. But all of them don't have to quite make money from it in quite the normal way. The Guardian is losing money in this recession hand over fist and is not in the same position as The Independent. It's just not. So the hidden story here is about ownership and money that will allow this kind of experimentation to go on.
So what would your advice be to someone like Pedro, who says, I believe we're doing something important for the world. Someone's got to pay for it. We see lots of change in the present and ahead. If you're hired on as consultant, the check has cleared. He's all ears. He's ready to write it down. What's your advice?
Well, my advice would be to make paths where people walk. Don't try and encourage people to walk in ways where they don't want to go, but make paths where people walk. So be led by what people want to do.
And is that a gentle way of saying that it may well be that people want to consume by the article, or heck, let's look ahead 5 years, by the paragraph. Paragraph 16 of this article, boy, that's a killer. And we're going to aggregate it with some other stuff.
They might want to consume primarily by the writer, but whatever it is, make paths where people walk and make sure the destination to which you're getting them to walk is really good and really attractive. Because the real challenge here is that, you know, I'm a former journalist, newspaper, all the rest of it. Of course, newspapers have done important investigative reporting. That's a tiny part of what they've done. Actually, the truth is about much media is that it hasn't been good enough. And it's now exposed to competition. And the competition is kids the age of my youngest have lots and lots of other things to do. They can go and talk, they can go and play, they can go and create, they can go and contribute, they can play on Guitar Hero or GarageBand and do stuff with it, which is frankly more interesting than watching something that they don't think is for them. And that capture is no longer true. So you have to make sure that what you do is really, really good, and that's the pressure.
Pedro?
Consumption by the paragraph. My goodness.
You heard it here first.
The Google's vice president, Mayer, at the Washington hearings said that it's stupid that the different publishers are competing with the same stories in different pages. Why don't they join forces and contribute in a single page, which would be the reference of a specific story? And she also put the example of Wikipedia. I had here twice or three times the name of Wikipedia. And I'm going to tell you a very short personal experience. Last year, I went with my longtime partner and our common daughter to the United States to look for universities for our daughter. And we visited several universities in the East Coast. We went to Harvard. The marshal of the university, a very nice lady, kind of public relations, had a long interview.
You figured out the marshal's office.
Yeah,
yes.
at the marshal's office. And there, in that very nice house, around that table, we talked for about 1 hour. She was very nice, she was very sympathetic, and at the end, she said, since we are already friends, let me show you something that maybe you are going to find a little bit embarrassing. Anytime a foreign visitor comes, I receive from our documentation department some files about them. And let me show you what Wikipedia says about you.
And you had not seen this?
No, I hadn't seen that. And, well, I began to take a look, and the professional facts were right. Well, not some of them not too accurate. But behind the line personal life, it says, he is divorced and lives with Ralph Lauren. And after 10 seconds silence, I told her, of course, Ralph is waiting in the car for us. No, that's a real story. Maybe not in so funny terms. You had here a lot of them many times, but that's the real point is that we should worry very much about contents in the internet and Google as an engine search, Google News, the aggregators. All these are wonderful tools, but the key question for our civilization would be what kind of contents are you aggregating?
Now, you can't say there isn't a lot on the table here. We don't have a whole lot of time left, but there is a big brain trust in this room, and I have a microphone. So please indicate if you would like to join the conversation, and just ask that you keep it brief so we can get lots in.
Okay, I'll keep it
Tell
short.
us who you are.
So Frank Moon, I'm look after Inc Mobile, which is part of the Hutchison Whampoa Group. I have a non-European kind of question for you, as the Aussie accent. But I actually got a question for both Pedro and Carolyn just around this whole issue of content management and story control and the phenomenon of Twitter. So I know a lot of journalists who are almost forced to tweet a story these days, like forced to tweet during a day. And it's just interesting that if their own media organisations are forcing them to do that, and I do know some in The Guardian who are not forced but do that a lot, the content gets down to 140 characters. And you were just talking about the content management, but also the story itself. How do you control a story? Because if you tweet that you've just seen someone, then someone else can pick that up. So I'm just interested playing with all these new mediums, but controlling a story. Just interested in your opinions about that.
We have no, we don't impose that on our journalists. What Alan Rusbridger says to all his journalists is, you've got to try everything. So, he got them onto Facebook very early. He got them on, so he would just say they have to understand social media to do their jobs. He doesn't make them tweet. Jemima Kiss, for instance, she tweets all the time. It's part of her journalism. She uses it almost as a research tool. So she will say, I'm going to do this. Tell me what you think. Give me your views. If you want me to ask a question at number 10, let me know. So she actually uses it as a journalist, as a journalistic tool, and others use it very differently. So I think the really important thing for us is that it might be Twitter today, it might be something completely different in 6 months' time. The fact is, for us, it's important to experiment, for our content, our journalists, to be on there, so that we are on that very different audience and community. So we're part of that community.
Pedro?
I agree with that. Twitter can be a very useful tool, a wonderful way to explain things that are on the making. For instance, our London correspondent did a wonderful coverage through Twitter of the demonstrations with the G20. And the readers had the opportunity to get the news as if he was broadcasting them, the news live for a TV or a radio station. I think a big organization as ours should use all these different ways to communicate with the readers and with the citizens.
Got it. Martin Versavsky.
Yeah, thanks, Jonathan. No, I had a question for the people in the newspaper industry that, don't you think the problem is not that whether newspapers have a future, but it's just the paper part that may not have a future. The rest can go on.
I think it's about the content. I mean, you'll notice I haven't really used the word newspaper that much in my question, in what we've been talking about. I think it's about the content. And I don't know. I mean, I think as long as there are consumers who want the printed content, then we will have to find a way of delivering the printed content, and we'll have to do that in the most efficient way possible. I mean, to Charlie's point, the fact is, printed newspapers currently need presses, they need ink, they need people, they are manufacturing businesses. We've also got a web business, which is much more agile, much easier to change, much easier to shift. So, we actually run two quite different businesses in an integrated way, but their back ends are quite different businesses, and we're in transition. That's what I keep emphasizing. For Charlie to say we're losing money hand over fist, we're losing money in a recession hand over fist, but there are probably 5 companies in the world that have not been affected by this downturn in a really negative way. So there is something cyclical going on, and then there's something structural going on. I think for content businesses, they have to know which end of that they're at and what they're coping with well. Because if they don't, they'll be really screwed as they come out.
Mark, you wanted to weigh in?
Just to say, I think the other thing that we sometimes forget is that certainly in the broadcast space, different kinds of content are moving into the future at different speeds. News and information is becoming, anatomized, broken up, experienced as a cloud on multiple devices in real time, much more than other kinds of entertainment, for example. The other end of the spectrum, 2.5 hours in the movie theatre watching Star Trek still feels like a 2009 experience. So I think one of the things I'd say is, if you think about different blocks of content, they have slightly different stories, and certainly in business model terms, the differences are material. And what we would essentially say is that news and information is moving very quickly, that many forms of narrative and scripted entertainment are moving at their slowest, and content which is educational, specialist factual, and so forth is somewhere in the middle. And in a way, it's one of the sort of wrong simplifications is to imagine it's all going to move in one go. Actually, I think it's stretching out. And you will still, 10 years from now, have some people who are experiencing certain kinds of media in a very traditional way. The passive enjoyment of media has never been better. 3D is about to make it that much better again.
Yeah. Over here, tell us who you are.
Suchi Mukherjee, I run Gumtree. And slightly different question for Mark. First a comment and then a question. So firstly, I think with iPlayer, you've shown two things. One is that there can be something like a Nintendo Wii that appeals very much to a 4-year-old, and my daughter uses it all the time. And my second hypothesis is that very quickly you'll see that demographic splitting where you'll have 4 to 15-year-olds, securely browsing content on the web. So kudos to you. My question to you is, you've also shown that innovation can work in a publicly funded organization, and you've actually beaten a lot of the juice and the equivalents of the world to get iPlayer out of the door. The question is, organizationally, and given the publicly funded context you operate in, how do you create space for innovation?
Well, I mean, firstly, the point that a number of people have made is right, that having the, if you want to call it a business model, but having the incredible privilege of the kind of funding we have makes a big difference. But what we've tried to do is to try and to, firstly, pick the teams, critically Eric Huggers, who really was critical in moving iPlayer out of the door, as you put it exactly right, and getting it in the shape it needed to be. Firstly, making sure the people around him, that he had all the support to get all the people he needed. And then in a way, for people like me in the organization, then to kind of keep the rest of the organization far enough back that they could do their thing. I mean, the main thing about, it seems to me, about a big organization is that it's just creating enough oxygen for people with great ideas to breathe and to be able to do what they do. And it is hard. It's hard in a very big organisation. All I'd say is, I mean, I don't know quite why it is, but the BBC has over a long time had a weird mixture of conservatism and occasionally, possibly sometimes panic-induced desperation to kind of suddenly create something new. And we still seem to have that. And the other thing is that because a lot of the underlying content that we make is good, very good, and people love it, in a way, often you get very able people, able computer scientists, for example, wanting to join the BBC because they love Top Gear. And kind of, I mean, being serious, in Silicon Valley, Top Gear is a big thing. And actually, it's been a reason that some of the best people have joined us, is a love of what it is the BBC stands for. And actually, for some of them also, this concept of public service broadcasting, and actually, very much like Scott Trust and Guardian Media Group, the idea that you're doing this for a purpose which goes beyond monetization.
Right. Charlie, I know you want to get in. Both pebbles and rocks can innovate?
Well, they can. I mean, I think another answer to your question is that actually at the BBC there is a kind of low-level civil war going on. And it's a kind of low-level... I mean, it is a kind of low-level civil war.
She says that's what she was actually asking about. She was just being very polite.
I think that Mark is doing a fantastically good job at kind of managing it because, as there are in most media businesses, I mean, I got roasted at a conference for Fremantle Media where there was virtually a bun fight between the games people and the kind of people who make the bill. Because the people who make the bill say, we are the people who get the audience and make the money, and the people who make the games say, yeah, but we get all the real people, and okay, we're not making any money yet, but we will in future. And most media businesses, there is that civil war going on.
And that can be a source of creativity.
If managed properly,
It can be catastrophically destructive, but done in the right way, those tensions actually are quite interesting and exciting.
I would be very interested to hear whether Jean-Bernard thinks there is that mix at Vivendi. Have you got that, or is it just separate?
Yeah, have a good civil war going,
I was thinking we have an interesting debate where it seems that quality content is going to survive with public money or trust over in the United Kingdom, and us poor people in continental Europe, what can we do against that? We have to protect our IP. There is a big dilemma going on, what can we do? Is display money enough? Do we have to charge people?
So you still feel like you're playing defense?
No. Do we have to charge people? No, we know that charging is, of course, leading to piracy. So I haven't heard a lot about my friends in the newspaper area trying to help us combat against piracy, although it's pretty tough in the music and the film industries right now. So maybe they feel they are a bit protected themselves for the time being, but I doubt it in the long run. I believe I would have hoped we get a bit more support from the press.
Well, I guess
in
you
what
might
we've
hear
been trying
Charlie
to do
telling you
against
that you've got to
piracy.
put the path where the people walk.
I mean, any industry that regards its leading young consumers as pirates is in trouble.
Yeah.
Basically, industry after industry in media, film, music, publishing, it's the pirates who create new spaces. And if you try and run them out of business, you won't find what the new space is. You've got to follow them.
It's going to work, don't worry.
Good. You have a plan.
But the pirates are not the consumers. The pirates are some aggregators. Some aggregators are the pirates.
Here come the glasses.
Because they are trying to make money. They are trying to make money with our content.
So your basic question is, when will Google pay for content? Basically.
No.
It is basically.
I think the right question is first, what kind of support can we get from all kind of, whether it's the government, whether it's the press, and so on, to try to help protect content? And the second question is, what about net neutrality? Are we going towards net neutrality? What about the debate about whether the internet is a sort of basic right of mankind and so on? And I think that's the next, debate for the next 5 years.
I think you would find, we had a day at the BBC actually where there was video games manufacturers, the whole music industry essentially, the whole film industry, broadcasters there, not to be fair, many newspapers, talking about piracy. And actually I think you'd be pleasantly surprised at the extent to which the content industries in the UK as a whole believe that piracy, well, got to be, it's got to be worked through. A model which says criminalise pirates and punt them down isn't going to work. But what are the set of things you can do in terms of making legal ways of getting content more attractive, of media literacy and explaining to the public what's going on here, and also the whole issues of legislation and the role of the ISPs and the aggregators. What I would say is I think you'd find the UK content industries more ready to start the conversation and to support you than your last comments suggested.
Well, I think in this 75-minute window, we've gotten a great glimpse into some of the dilemmas that you are facing at your respective helms and podiums, trying to think through some of this stuff. I said a podium.
A podium.
Respective helms and podiums. I had you in mind, Charlie. You'd like this one, you can have it.
Thank you.
But some of the real dilemmas you're thinking through, some sense of this question that's still lingering about is newsmaking and this function of journalism that has gotten some of you can see the shine in the eyes as you start talking about the essence of journalism. Is that somehow different and distinct from just another, quote, media property or something for which you need a model? And we've seen such a great variety of models and thinking about models out there. And also a reminder of how much it boils down to human capital. Whether you're a rolling rock or a rolling stone, what kind of human moss are you gathering around yourself that will ultimately have you be the quality instrument that you know you want to be, not just from a consumer point of view, but this kind of participatory stuff. And with that, we owe you a huge thanks for sharing your thoughts and participating in this panel today. Thank you.